New year, new videos. Let's kick off 2021 with a game that came out just before 2020 ended. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Not only another Dynasty Warriors spin-off starring Zelda characters, but also a prequel game to Breath of the Wild, set 100 years in the past. That's a pretty ambitious idea and no doubt a difficult feat to accomplish given how messed up everything was in Breath of the Wild. That alone made me wonder how Age of Calamity was going to be handled.
The original Hyrule Warriors came out for the Wii U in 2014, which I already made a review for during its opening week. I'll put a card up top if you're interested. I don't blame you if you aren't, not my proudest video. But there's been a shed load of extra content and multiple re-releases since we talked about it anyway. New characters, new adventure maps, new features, and new frustrations. There was so much packed in that eventually by 2016, Hyrule Warriors got re-released with everything included and even more to do when Hyrule Warriors Legends for the 3DS. This was less than a year before the Switch came out, and I'm surprised it runs as well as it does on a new 3DS. I played a lot of this version, but my god, it's so rough now. I think they should have just waited a little longer before they finally released the definitive edition for the Switch 2 years later. If you want to play the first Hyrule Warriors these days, this is how you do it. All of the extras from both the Wii U and 3DS versions are here. You get a smoother frame rate, albeit not perfect, and you still get the portability that Legends tried to market. I had to borrow my brother's digital copy to get this footage because prices for the definitive edition have surprisingly got more steep, and I'm unsure why. It's not that scarce as far as I'm aware, so what gives? Did so few people buy it that there are only these copies left? Nonetheless, while I enjoyed the original Hyrule Warriors enough back when it first released, it isn't worth doing again for a third time in my eyes, especially given how the following Warriors spin-off Fire Emblem Warriors was the superior game in my opinion, and Age of Calamity being just as good. I'll be discussing Fire Emblem Warriors later in the Fire Emblem Marathon starting next time, so come check it out when I finally upload the video. Hyrule Warriors and Fire Emblem Warriors were developed by Omega Force alongside Team Ninja, and published by Koei Tecmo, but Age of Calamity was only done by Omega Force, no Team Ninja involved. I don't have a problem with that. These guys have been responsible for the Dynasty Warriors games for years. They clearly know what they're doing if they continue to grow strong today. Warriors games though are generally ones I have to be in the mood to play. I've never been like, oh my god, I must play this now. Honestly, if Age of Calamity didn't have the Zelda brand under it, same with Fire Emblem Warriors, I may not have even bothered getting them. As a matter of fact, I still haven't touched a single Dynasty Warriors game. I don't know, something about them just tells me they may not be my kind of games. Plot time first though, before we get any further, and I'll add a time code here to help avoid unnecessary spoilers, but truth be told, there's not a great deal here, and the summary's only gonna take a few minutes. I'm also gonna spoil a little bit on which characters are playable later, but that's the risk you take for looking at an online review anyway. As the Great Calamity is coming into effect and Guardians are running amok, a small white Guardian wakes up inside Hyrule Castle and escapes through a time portal right back to before the Calamity enveloped the land. The Hyrulean soldiers, god, Hyrulean still doesn't flow with the tongue, are seen preparing for the return of Calamity Ganon, and as they battle dangerous enemies to protect Hyrule, Link accidentally stumbles upon the little Guardian and takes him under his wing, eventually meeting with a much younger Impa, acting as the advisor to the royal family. After the two then come face to face with Princess Zelda, they take the Guardian to engineers Pura and Robbie, learning that it's from the future foretelling Ganon's reawakening, all thanks to this dark wizard named Astor, along with his accomplices the Yiga clan and their master Koga. As such, King Rhoam sends Zelda, Link, Impa, and the Guardian to seek out the 4 champions to pilot each of the divine beasts from Breath of the Wild. Once the 4 champions are found, it's about as routine as you'd expect for a Zelda game. They find the Master Sword to rid of the malice surrounding Hyrule, you make new friends with the Koroks and even the Yiga clan pretty late into the game because they got tired of Astor being as interesting as cardboard too. Calamity Ganon is then revived, takes over the castle, and kills King Rhoam, except not really because he's revealed to be alive and well moments afterwards. Also, in the luckiest of days, the champions are about to be axed off too, just like in Breath of the Wild, but are suddenly saved by Sidon, Riju, Yunobo, and Tiba, who have also traveled back in time to help prevent the Calamity from spreading. So, okay, this completely changes Breath of the Wild's story. It's still considered canon too, just set in a different timeline? I don't understand why they needed to do this. Why couldn't we just get a simple story of how Hyrule became messed up, forcing Zelda to protect it for 100 years years, and how the champions, the king, and even Link died before Breath of the Wild takes place. Like, imagine if at the end of the game you see the champions making one final sacrifice to save Hyrule after bonding with them for so long. Sure, you would know exactly what was going to happen, but how much more powerful and heartbreaking would that have been if they went in this direction? Why did we need to include all of this time travel nonsense? Time travel's nothing new to the Zelda series, I'm aware. We have at least 3 games dedicated to it, for crying out loud, but it feels like they just added a time travel element for the sake of it, not because the story demanded it. It comes across as a bit of a cheap gimmick that excuses anything they do to change the storyline, which only ends up making things more confusing. Well anyway, now that everything's in place, all of the warriors assemble to finally take down Calamity Ganon. Astor blocks their progress though as they're about to reach the last room, but is absorbed into Harbinger Ganon, who then transforms into Calamity Ganon, taking on a new form compared to his Breath of the Wild counterpart. Calamity Ganon turns the little guardian into an enemy that Link beats the hell out of, and only now does Zelda remember that she built the guardian as a kid and named it Terrico, but the king, being the same asshole of a father he's always been, took Terrico away from Zelda so that she could focus on her training. Dude, she's like 7, what's she gonna do with that age? Everybody confronts Calamity Ganon in one final duel, but Terrico comes in the nick of time to self-destruct and weaken Ganon. After then battling him one more time, Zelda seals Calamity Ganon away for good, the side characters return to their future, and peace has been restored to Hyrule once again. I should mention that there's also a secret ending, and a very nice one I might add, if you complete challenges that reward you with Terrico parts that can be used to repair him. It takes a while, but doing that unlocks him as a new playable character, and if you do the preceding challenges, you actually get to play as Calamity Ganon. This is so weird. I know Ganondorf was playable in the first Hyrule Warriors, but he at least kind of had a separate storyline that tied into everyone else's. Calamity Ganon doesn't get anything like that, so it was a strange surprise to see. He plays pretty well, but by this point in the game, he's a little underpowered, especially if you've been doing as many available challenges like I did. Even as far as Zelda stories go, this one is pretty basic, probably one of the most simplistic in a long time. Despite the addition of a good little guardian that accompanies the party, it hits all the notes you'd come to expect, further accentuated if you play Breath of the Wild, with one particular plot element seemingly retconning everything that happened in that game for no worthy reason. It's sounding as if I really don't like the story, but I honestly think it's fine, just perhaps a bit too safe and full of conveniences. I will say though that out of the crossover Warriors titles released so far, this narrative is definitely the most well told and presented. Cutscenes look exactly as they do in Breath of the Wild, there's way more of them this time, and all of the same actors reprise their roles, with the same hit or miss performances. I don't think I ever got annoyed with the Zelda characters so fast like I did with Robbie. He's far too energetic and over the top for the wrong reasons, and he's got an obnoxious voice to go with it.
We've got ourselves a brand new, never before witnessed Guardian Battle!
Just no.
I do at least like how much more developed Zelda herself is. She didn't get a lot to do in Breath of the Wild, so it was a bit tricky to feel invested until the final memories, but now that Zelda becomes a full-on party member in Age of Calamity, she's given more screen time to further flesh out her character, and I appreciate that. The character interactions all around can be fairly entertaining. One of my favorite moments being Link scorching down a molten Goron rock tree like an utter champ. As for the new villain, Astor, holy crap, if there was an award for the most boring Zelda antagonist in the series history, he'd probably win. His motivation is unbelievably weak, he's given very uninspiring lines, and Astor can't seem to decide whether he wants to be a super serious bad guy or a cackling madman, so he teeters back and forth between the two, coming across as unfocused and, like I said, boring. His title is the Prophet of Doom, for goodness sake. How do you take something as silly as that and make him boring? That is an accomplishment. That aside, cutscenes aren't the only thing that Omega Force has perfectly replicated. They clearly did their homework on making everything in Age of Calamity feel like it belongs in the Breath of the Wild universe. The visuals are a great start, and they look spectacular, but yeah, let's talk about the frame rate like many others have brought up. You're stuck with 30 frames per second, and you aren't given any performance options like in Fire Emblem Warriors, which I can deal with, but when the action gets too crazy and there's so much happening on the screen at once, the frame rate is downright awful. Luckily, this didn't occur too frequently for me, and it was usually brief when it did, but the dip does ruin the play unpleasant imagery sometimes, doubly so when the camera's in enclosed areas and starts freaking out. Can you even tell what I'm doing right now? Still, it's so impressive how this looks and feels right at home with Breath of the Wild. They got every detail down splendidly. I really love the watercolor portraits for the characters as well. These are gorgeous to look at, and it's a shame you don't get to see them more often. The attention to detail even applies to the overworld map, acting as a central hub for all of the game's missions, on top of holding several merchants to buy materials from, which can then be exchanged for a number of character enhancements like extra hearts or combos, as long as the specifications are met. It made me so happy to see that the materials now gravitate towards you after they drop from enemies. Seriously, that was so annoying in the first Hyrule Warriors when you had to pick up every single one, even in later revisions, and you were forced to keep hearing dun 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 dun. Some of the overworld quests will even unlock new characters to play as if you do enough of them. And can I just say real quick, in spite of Breath of the Wild having so few main characters in the game, it amazes me how Omega Force still managed to put together an entire roster to experiment with, even if it's not as big as the first games, and it really stretches which characters should be playable. Like, who thought you could control Hestu the giant Korok? All he did was expand your inventory if you gave him enough Korok seeds. There wasn't any more to him, and you still need to find Korok seeds across the land to obtain certain upgrades. Hell, let's go even more obscure. We'll have the monk be playable too. That guy whose only job was to meet you at the end of the shrines and nothing else. How did this become a thing? Why stop there? Let's put in the Great Fairies as well. Okay, actually the Great Fairies were way better fighters than I thought they'd be. I surprisingly had a lot of fun playing as them. They're freaking huge, so their hitbox is larger as a result, but they're no slouch in a fight. Hestu and the monk really didn't do much for me personally. They're not too flexible with their attacks and it kills their momentum when they do. Not characters I'm willing to spend hours practicing with. Hestu maybe, but certainly not the monk. I didn't enjoy playing as Tiba either. He just zips all over the place without feeling like I'm in control. And Zelda herself was kind of a mixed bag. She uses the Sheikah Slate to attack with runes in certain ways, and some of them were alright to use, but others had too much wind-up for my liking. However, late in the story, she gets equipped with her bow and arrows of light, and suddenly she's become one of my go-to characters. These were way faster to use, and Zelda becomes more agile. I don't think I'll ever be using the Sheikah Slate again now. My best character to play as was undoubtedly Mipha. I love controlling someone who has wicked fast combos, although Urbosa was a pretty good choice too. She's not as quick as Mipha, but she's a bit stronger and also comes equipped with lightning powers, and as much as I don't like Rivali as a character because of his douchiness, his bow and arrow techniques are nothing to scoff at either. Unlike the first Hyrule Warriors, there isn't an adventure mode to do side missions that give you something else to accomplish after finishing the story. Instead, Age of Calamity places each story mission and multiple side missions adjacent to one another, unlocking more missions as you complete certain ones or advance through the plot. The missions give you a recommended level to consider getting up to 4 characters by, but like in the first game, you can spend rupees to catch a character up to whoever currently has the highest level, and you're also able to hire a blacksmith to gradually improve the amount of damage each character's weapon does. If that still doesn't prove to be enough, then if you have the right ingredients, you can alternatively do some cooking to provide temporary stat boosts for that certain mission. I mostly cooked for XP boosts or damage increases for any strenuous side challenges. Otherwise, Age of Calamity for the most part has a fairly balanced difficulty. When it comes to the actual combat, it's about the same as it was in the first Hyrule Warriors and Fire Emblem Warriors. Light attacks are done with the Y button and heavy attacks are done with the X button. You can chain combos together by doing a number of light attacks, then follow up with a heavy attack, and the more hits you land, the more you fill up your special attack gauge, where by pressing the A button once it's full, you can unleash a blow that has a wide AoE and does plenty of damage. Running and dodging is once again done by pressing the B button, and added from Breath of the Wild is the perfect dodge maneuver, where you can let loose a flurry of attacks if you evade at just the right time. It's difficult to get the timing down just like in Breath of the Wild, but it's great for landing several hits easily, and incredibly handy for depleting the enemy's weakness gauge, where by fully lowering it, you can let one more attack fly that does even greater damage than the special attacks. You're able to activate that attack at your own pace now, as opposed to the last 2 crossover Warriors games where it happened as soon as you got close to the enemy. I very rarely feel the need to hold out on doing so though, but I'm sure the Warriors veterans will appreciate that. You're also given more tools to work with here. Magic rods come in 3 different elements and are fantastic for dealing with bosses and the like with the opposite element, since that leaves them staggered for a while and the weakness gauge is easier to diminish. But you can only use them so many times before having to kill elemental foes to replenish them, like Wizrobes. In addition, each character has their own skill you can pull off by pressing ZR. For example, Link being able to fire arrows, Hestu summoning Koroks to help him out, or Rivali taking taking flight for a better chance of avoiding enemies and having even more combos to try out. Runes are another means of scattering roaches if you need to. The bombs, stasis, magnesis, and cryonis return from Breath of the Wild, with each character having different ways of using the runes, but they're essentially the same as they were before, except for magnesis, which can also now grab and throw back enemy weapons. There is a cooldown period upon using them again, but they're alright for wiping out a small group of baddies, and the tougher fellas will even give you an indication as to what you should be using on them to momentarily knock them out and expose their weakness gauge. You need to be quick on your feet about that though, so don't hesitate. I was surprised to see that the keeps, or outposts in Age of Calamity, don't play a major role like they did in the first game in Fire Emblem Warriors. Taking them over would boost morale for your army, but there's nothing like that in this pseudo-sequel. Totally unrelated as well, but controlling the Divine Beasts were also rather underwhelming. They're essentially glorified turret sections with slightly more mobility. The Divine Beasts are fun to control for a few minutes, and the sections with them are quite short, but the novelty wears off pretty quickly and only gets worse when you're asked to do more of these missions further down the road. Hey, quick question, why aren't these things used all the time during the story? It seems like they'd make short work of everything. I'm sure there's probably some bullshit plot convenient reason for it, but I'm legit curious. Sadly, the Divine Beast sections aren't the only thing lacking variety. The types of enemies and bosses you encounter isn't any better than how it was in Breath of the Wild. The bosses in particular require that you defeat a lot of them, and Jesus Christ do I now really hate fighting Lynels. Substantially so if they come in packs. You also remember the Guardians, you know, arguably one of the most fearsome enemies in Breath of the Wild? Well, Age of Calamity has now made them total pushovers. One special attack is enough to cut off all of their legs, and the weakness gauge is permanently exposed afterwards to make for easy kills. So what's the game's idea of ramping up tension with these things? Well, why don't we put in Fire Guardians, or Ice Guardians, or Electric Guardians? Okay, this is just getting silly now. Not to mention overkill. And they do this with all of the bosses. I can at least understand the Taluses being elemental because they're buried in different regions of the Breath of the Wild map. But why does something like the Hinox or the goddamn Lynels need it? They're already tricky to take down, we don't need this extra bit of tension. It gets especially tiring when the game likes to throw several of the Malice variations at once, which are the strongest in the game. A lot of the post-story challenges love to reuse them, and it's always irritating to fight them. Unfortunately, as for your allies, they again do not have a mind of their own when it comes to time-pressing matters. They at least try a little harder than in the first Hyrule Warriors, but it's still mostly you doing all the work. And there will be many occasions where you might need to direct other playable characters to a certain point in the battlefield, and then switch to them when you need to. A feature brought over from Hyrule Warriors Legends and Definitive Edition. You can't teleport like you can in the first Hyrule Warriors either, which is a bummer. I don't know why that wasn't included as well, because it would certainly help with the more difficult missions. The side challenges altogether took more of my time to complete than the story missions did. My playtime eventually came to 30 plus hours as I finished the story. And like I said, there are post-game challenges for you to do afterwards. So by the time I did some of those and unlocked all of the extra characters, that time boosted to 42 hours, my lord. I decided enough was enough when I got to the challenges that needed you to tackle various Malice enemies, while also trying to avoid environmental hazards, perhaps fight Astor and even Calamity Ganon a couple more times, all under an extremely short time limit. I was like, yeah, no thanks, I'm done now. I might come back to them myself someday, but I just know there's gonna be a ton of necessary grinding involved.
That's the big question when it comes to any Warriors game, Age of Calamity being no exception. Do you think you'd be comfortable doing the same thing over and over again for at least 40 hours? There may have been a number of improvements since the original Hyrule Warriors, but it still comes down to highly repetitive gameplay that might ask for too much of your time.
For me personally, I don't have that much of a problem with it, but these aren't the kinds of games I'll happily start over someday just to experience everything again. There isn't a lot of incentive to do so, and what you see is basically what you get. That's not a bad thing, and I'm sure it's what pleases plenty of Warriors fans. It just doesn't do any more for me than what I'm given. Zelda fans and perhaps Dynasty Warriors fans have probably already bought this anyway, and I hope you're having a good time with it, because despite its repetitious nature, Age of Calamity is a good time, even better than what the first Hyrule Warriors gave us. It's unique for a crossover Warriors title without straying too much from the usual formula, while keeping in spirit with its source material, and I can recommend it to those looking for a quick and stylish hack and slasher. Just don't expect to beat it in a weekend or have a lot of replay value.
This won't be the end for the crossover Warriors games though, as we're also getting Persona 5 Strikers next month, and you bet your ass I'm gonna review it. Until then, however, it's finally time to start the next marathon, and this year's is going to be on the Fire Emblem series, the Western releases anyway. I don't know if if I'll have the energy to do them all in one go, but we'll see what happens, and I'll take a break if I need to. I'm not gonna burn myself out over these games, but I hope you guys enjoy the videos when they're done. Thanks everyone for watching, stay safe, stay healthy, and see you next time. But it still all comes down to this... I'm not gonna burn myself out over these games, and, the Western releases anyway. I'm